Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, General Data Protection Regulation and Identity and Access Management. I'm Sami Lindgren, the Sales Engineer for UbiSecure's Identity Relationship and Access Management Solutions. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I want to let everyone know that the phones are on mute. We do encourage questions, and we will leave plenty of time after the presentation for Q&A. To ask a question, please use the question field within the GoToWebinar toolbar. We will also be recording today's webinar and providing a link to the recording in a follow-up email to you. It's time to get started. First couple of words about UbiSecure. UbiSecure provides identity and access management software and services. We make it possible for organizations to use rich digital identities to simplify and secure access for applications, services, and devices. The company was founded in 2002, and UbiSecure is a pioneering European B2B and B2C identity services software and cloud services provider dedicated to enabling the true potential of digital business. And next I would like to introduce our presenters today, Mr. Keith Huber, VP Sales Engineering, and Mr. Ted Securto, Technology Partnership Manager and DPO. It's all yours, Keith and Ted.
Great, thanks, Sami. It's a pleasure to be here. It's nice to see everybody here on the webinar today on the topic of customer identity and access management and how it relates to GDPR compliance. We're going to make a lot of assumptions today that you know what GDPR is, General Data Protection Regulation, and I'm not going to bore you with the details which everybody should know by this stage as the GDPR deadline approaches for enforcement. We're going to touch on a number of topics, starting with ensuring data accuracy of your users, collecting consent when it's required, how to maintain and prove that you collected that consent. We're going to look at per-purpose consent and the importance of always collecting the purpose for the consent that you're gathering. We'll talk about attribute handling, data minimization, and the last topic for today will be handling public access requests quickly and effectively using a CIAM system.
And although the focus today is on the GDPR, this topic applies to many other national data protection legislative requirements all around the world. And we start with privacy and consent. And the reason of existence, why do we have the GDPR? Is simply preserving the individual's privacy in today's digital world. And the heart of the GDPR is the notion that the end users themselves should be in control of their own personal information. And consent is one of the mechanisms put in place to enable online services to continue offering rich, personalized experiences, including journeys across channels.
So by channels, you mean a customer might start their journey with you, for example, in a retail store. They might download a mobile app. They might later use their computer to browse online on your website. They might call your call center, later receive an email from you. There's a lot of different channels in a modern customer experience, in the modern information system. You need to manage the consent across all of those channels.
Exactly. We call this SSO, or single sign-on, and it is an extremely user-friendly feature. In a recent research paper, I remember reading that an average online user has to remember over 200 passwords for different services today. And believe me, nobody wants to make it 201.
With consent and privacy, we've got to remember that all personally identifiable information is protected. For example, IP addresses are a pinpoint data point where you can tie information to a user or a group of users, but also by combining non-PII attributes. You can, by default, be able to identify a unique user or a tiny subset of users, which is enough to threaten their privacy.
Yes, and the key point here is that information doesn't need to spell out a single individual. A small enough group is enough, and what exactly small group will be decided by code next year.
So under the GDPR, when you're collecting consent, a big change that impacts most web services right now is that bulk agreements are specifically deemed as being null and void. You can't expect the user to read a 20-page list of terms and conditions and click through and expect that to hold up in court. No longer can you rely on this type of agreements. Every agreement that the user makes around their own data privacy and personal data handling must be given in a clear, unambiguous form, and it must require a clear, positive action to enable that consent, collect that consent.
Exactly. And now we're heading towards the complete opposite of bulk agreements. Yes, I agree. Yes, I agree. Now, you need consent for every single use case of every single user attribute.
And the challenge is how to do that effectively in a way that doesn't scare or frighten the user, but empowers the user and gets them to understand that you are collecting their attributes for a reason that will benefit them, provide them service, and in such a way that if they ever need to query about that, you have the proof to collect and show back to them that you collected that consent.
Yes, and what the Consumer IAM enables here is the incremental collection of consent and user attributes, even across different services. Nobody, when installing, for example, a new app, nobody wants to see a 2-page list full of empty fields just begging for your personal information for unknown purposes. Most people will just click back or close the app immediately. It is much better to first simply ask, for example, email address, and then later the consumer or customer continues along the workflow, ask for additional attributes as needed.
So you should really ask for that consent at the exact time when that consent is required, and tie that consent to an action that the user is doing. For example, if the user is interested in accepting an email marketing message in order to keep in touch with changes to the product or service, at that point when they first request or indicate interest in that, you should collect consent for that action.
And one possible pitfall here is when doing a single sign-on from one service to another, you need explicit consent to be able to transmit any user attributes from the first service to the second. And you need to list also how they will be used in the second service.
As most modern services are made up of more than one service. For example, a consumer-facing service may consist of a web store, it may consist of a support forum, other customization tools. Often these services are running on different platforms, hosted in different locations, and made with different technologies. By using the identity access management capability, you can create a consent engine across those services in a common and consistent manner, in such a way to prevent having to ask the user in vain two consents for the same actual purpose.
Managing consent, it can be seen as a binary decision. Either you have the right to use the personal data the way you clearly describe it to your customer, or you don't have it. And Article 6 of the GDPR underlines certain specific use cases where you don't have to collect consent from the user. But today we will concentrate on the majority of the use cases, and those are when you need to collect consent from your user.
Another important point is that you have to build a service where, by law, the user can review their consents and manage them. It should be as easy for a user to see what they've consented to and revoke that consent as it is for them to give it to you. So CIAM solutions help with that process by providing central places to handle those transactions in a consistent way across various applications in your architecture.
Yes, a practical example is that a user can enable or give consent via an online form, then revoking it can't require sending a letter or calling an office. It must be able to be done online.
Similarly, if a user can accept consent by replying to an email, they should be able to revoke consent by replying to an email. The same thing. The World Economic Forum published a study in 2014 called Rethinking Personal Data. And this study found that if a user has online access to manage their data, if they have clear visibility to what data has been collected about them within a service, that they themselves feel empowered and they're more willing to actually give more information. They feel like they have control of their attributes, they have the ability to edit those and correct them and make more relevant decisions about their data. And this study showed that GDPR is actually adding value to services by giving users more trust in the services that they're using, by enabling them and empowering them to manage and edit their own data.
The most important point about the proof of consent in regards to GDPR is the reversed burden of proof. And this is a very strong statement and very rare in modern societies. So in practice, if the end user asks the service provider for proof of consent, the service provider must be able to deliver that. Otherwise, the situation is equal to not having any consent at all. And merely having a binary flag of having or not having consent is far from being enough. As a service provider, you have to be able to show how and when consent was collected, and in addition, what were the exact terms presented to the user.
This is quite a lot of effort to do if you have many applications on many platforms across your service. What CIAM brings is a central place to do that in a consistent way, so that when it comes time for a customer to get access to show that proof of consent, you can get that very quickly, even in an automated manner for the user in question. The GDPR also states that data subjects should have access to their own information and ability to take that data with them. If you're operating many different businesses, for example, across different business areas, or you have different brands, the business is changing through mergers and acquisitions, through spin-offs, you need to be able to maintain the consent and data subject information throughout those changes. Otherwise, you put yourself at risk of not being able to meet the requirements of the GDPR. In all cases, the end user themselves should be able to access their own identity data and personal data at their request.
And one other important part buried in the GDPR is that it requires that appropriate technical and organizational measures are taken to protect the personal information. Unfortunately for us and for myself as the DPO, it doesn't name those measures, like, for example, mandating multi-factor authentication. And this is very similar to other EU regulations, such as the eIDAS. However, an absence of any named technology should not be considered as dismissive. It definitely would be a sound business and compliance decision to consider both stronger authentication methods and multi-factor authentication.
It's quite natural if a customer comes to you and says, show me all the information you have about me. You need to be able to identify who's asking that question so that you can give them the information that you've collected about them. This in itself implies a way to authenticate them. And if the personal information is personal, then you should protect that data and require a strong way to authenticate them, typically using two-factor authentication to ensure that somebody can't try to access their data without their knowledge or approval.
Exactly. Unauthorized access is something you don't want to be explaining to your customers when the GDPR is in effect.
One more issue around access to your own information is in many cases the person who needs access to information or whose information is stored may not access that information themselves. Examples can be found, for example, when people are under care of others. For example, elderly people have given a power of attorney to their younger children to handle online affairs, or a child is information about a child is in an information system, or other cases where somebody is acting on somebody else's behalf. A CIAM system can manage these sometimes complex relationships, these electronic power of attorneys, which allow somebody else to perform action on somebody else's behalf. These systems can do that on a personal level or between businesses based on contractual agreements.
Now we have two specific rights granted under the GDPR. First is called right for erasure, most commonly known as the right to be forgotten on steroids this time. And the other one is right to data portability. And the first one, right for erasure, is simply treated as the subject withdrawing consent for all of his or her attributes. And here it's quite critical that rather than trying to hunt down personal information from dozens of unconnected systems and backups and log servers, it makes much more sense to utilize a centralized IAM solution where a central tenant is to act as a centralized database for all protected personal data.
The other one is the right to data portability. This is one of those empowering parts of the GDPR which lets a user take their data with them in a machine-readable format. So the regulation talks about a commonly used and machine-readable format. This is great for the end user that they can take their data with them, either for their own data storage in case the service that they're using ceases to exist, or for portability to another competing service. So this is, especially in the European Union, it's all about increasing the competition between services by allowing users to take their data with them. Unfortunately, in the GDPR, it doesn't specifically say how this will occur, in which data format, or how will you protect those interfaces that allow data to be extracted and taken with you. But fortunately, CIAM systems can provide those relevant protocols to allow these data portability, this export and import of data from one service to another, to happen in a seamless way with the user's consent in a completely automated manner without involving any of your help desk staff or IT support.
And here it is again important to think of strong authentication and two-factor authentication. You don't want just anybody to ask for somebody else's personal data dump and take them with them. And we will discuss the technical approaches to enable secure data portability in the next webinar.
Now let's talk about identity attributes. So different applications require different types of attributes to provide services. So for example, a web store that's selling shoes needs to know the shoe size of a user, or an email service needs to know your email address and maybe some information to help you reset your password in the event that you forget that. The CIAM solution can help with these by allowing you to create a user profile that sends only the minimum required amount of information to each connected service in order to comply with that minimum information disclosure principle. This means that the less information that you send to a target service from this central repository, the less information can be lost, or the less information is to be deleted in the event of a deletion request.
Yes, and also this means that you need to ask consent for far less attributes that you would have to if you simply would transmit everything you know about the user to an additional service. And of course, this vastly increases the chances the user actually agreeing, giving his or her consent for this data transfer. So you should see this as enabling more business, not restricting existing ones.
IAM systems can also handle transformation of identity attribute information. For example, some services may require your email address, your date of birth for a specific reason, but another service may only need to know, are you over the age of 18 or over the age of 16, for example. The identity access management system can handle that transformation of rich attributes into a binary attribute with no need to know the exact code of data at all. It can handle this in such a way that if the legislation changes in the future, you can have a record of what somebody's age was on a certain date and be able to extrapolate what their date is in some future time.
Yes. For example, a few years ago, I registered to a web service and confirmed that I was 18 years old. And now the age limit of the service changes to 20 for some reason. Well, it was 2 years ago, so now they can simply deduct that, okay, I am now at least 20 years old. So no need to ask for confirmation again.
The identity access management system can also handle the process of changes to the purpose of attributes or asking for additional attributes during the login process. So if a service requires, through development, it requires a new attribute about the user can be stopped and ask for that additional attribute and the consent connected to that attribute and that purpose, and then allow the user to continue to where they were going in a seamless manner. Because users may have started their journey from one of many other connected services, some users may have already given consent, and some users may have not. This dynamic way of collecting consent during the login process means that you don't have to ask consent from those users who've already granted it.
Now, as we are nearing the end of today's webinar, the theme of today was how can a consumer IAM solution help with GDPR compliance? So here we are listed some key points how IAM can help achieving compliance. And the first point is that to ensure accurate data, it's best to allow the users themselves, they who actually know their data, manage their own personal data by themselves. And this was one of the key points of the GDPR legislation itself.
The second good point is that we control the consent lifecycle in a consistent manner across services. This is from notifying about consent, collecting the consent, allowing consent to be revoked, allowing consent to be viewed, and allowing deletion requests to be initiated.
Of course, with a centralized IAM system, you can also provide consistent and equally important audible processes across different services. What attributes were transferred based on what consent when? And this simplifies consent handling a lot as the processing reasons change. For example, if you have granted permission for one service to use, for example, your email address for both marketing and direct business-related reasons, then you can simply extrapolate that to another service simply by asking it from the first service.
CIAM systems can also handle attributes securely by managing them in a secure location, in an encrypted format, and sending them only to connected applications when they're required, at the time they're required. This means you have this minimum information disclosure throughout your IT systems. In the modern application, often users are federating. They're coming in from complementary services, third parties who have cooperation with you, or they're continuing their journey after using your web service and continuing at another web service. CIAM also allows, through federation, the transmission of information related to consent handling, which may have occurred prior to their arrival at your service, especially for software as a service providers whose software is embedded within another service.
And earlier we touched on right to be forgotten, or right for erasure, and right for data portability. These are commonly called as subject access requests, and a centralized IAM solution offers a very user-friendly way of handling it. Instead of contacting your customer service and perhaps hunting down dozens of pieces of paper, printing them out and mailing them to the user, after somehow identifying him or her, of course, the end user can do all of this online in a self-service portal.
The last point we want to raise about how CIAM can help GDPR compliance is through rapid deployment. Time is running out for deploying systems which will help achieve compliance in GDPR, and by choosing an off-the-shelf CIAM system which can be configured for your environment, you can quickly get running and achieve compliance before the deadline next year. That concludes the first part of our CIAM and GDPR webinar. In part 2, we're going to cover more things which we haven't spoken about today. For example, determining and managing where personal data is actually physically stored, compliance for backend applications and microservices using OAuth 2 access tokens. We're going to talk about doing consent on behalf of other users who may not be able to perform online consent or have delegated that action to you. We're going to discuss in more depth the question of age and handling consent for age, particularly around access for minors to information services. And the last point, we're going to more depth around data portability, about how you can achieve a seamless, customer-friendly experience for moving customer data, for example, from your competitor system to your own. We thank you for your attention. We invite now your questions through the GoToWebinar question functionality. We'll take 3 or 4 questions depending on the time. We also welcome your comments or any other wishes for the following webinar. We may have a third webinar in the series depending on the interest. So one common question that we get is around what are the first steps you need to take to achieve GDPR compliance? Maybe, yes, do you want to tell us what are those steps if you haven't already taken them?
Well, starting from November this year, the first step would be renting a time machine. But if that is not available, then the first point would be to conduct a full data inventory within your organization. Where exactly is personal information stored? And please keep in mind here that GDPR expands the concept of personal information to, for example, IP addresses. Then the next steps would be to consolidate all the personal data into as few places as possible, preferably just one. All right, and we've had interesting questions here. Are there any benefits from the GDPR? And I can answer this as the DPO.
Sure.
So before the GDPR comes into effect, we have 28 different privacy legislations just within the EU. That is 28 different legal frameworks you need to comply with in order to offer your service throughout the EU. And after May 2018, there will be just one. And this creates a single market, just like the USA, for example. And the point here is that here GDPR can turn privacy and data protection as a sales point. We do protect your data.
So we got a question from Patrick regarding the delegate user function and how delegate user function can, how it relates to GDPR scope. So delegate user lets you take a role and delegate it either to another user within your own organization, or we can delegate a task to a third party, for example, another organization, who can then delegate a task or role to members of that organization. In the software, we can enable that this delegation requires also approval of the receiver of that delegation. So both parties in the delegation process need to make that active, clear action to initiate transfer of access rights. So the requester is performing action to give rights to another individual or organization, and if it's configured, the receiver will receive notification and will need to approve that themselves. So in both cases, they're receiving, sending and receiving that access right. It's possible to model consent around access rights. For example, consent to operate using a given contract number, or consent to do an action in a web service on somebody's behalf. In regard to personal data, it's possible to model access to personal data as a role that can be delegated to another user. For example, permission to process my personal data, or to process my organization's personal data, and to manage that throughout the delegate user process. In the delegate user function, you can also, as a delegator, remove and revoke that consent that you've granted to another party. Typically, these company delegations or user delegations are used by software as a service providers who are operating services based on service contracts. And we're going to talk about operating on somebody else's behalf in the second part of the webinar. That same delegate user, the roles that are managed by the delegate user function can be mapped also to OAuth scopes. So later we'll see that how you can allow or deny access to a web service, for example, a backend service or microservice, based on the presence or absence of a role or attribute that the user has. So this function delegate user also ties into the plumbing of the system to allow electronic access to data. Good question. So around consent, we've got another follow-up question regarding the delegate user function. Around GDPR and personal data, it's not necessary to use delegate user function to enable consent. The user themselves, as an individual, they can also approve or revoke consent without using delegation. So it's possible to enable a consent screen which appears after the login event to basically the user cannot proceed with access to an application until they've approved the required consent requirements. It's possible to redirect the user during the login process to a custom application to handle whatever unique business logic you have regarding consent management or related user profile management, and then allow the user to resume the login flow from where they were going, and they'll get access to the target application as well as collecting the relevant consent. Secure also has consent engine functionality, allowing an API for access to model and map consents to allow a shared service to handle consent from different jurisdictions, to handle the requirements of the GDPR around providing evidence of the collected consent, storing references to the required documentation, and doing this in an auditable manner, which can also be deleted on request of the end user. And we're going to talk about that in future webinars. Okay, so I want to thank everybody for their attention today. We'll make this webinar will be available on our social media feeds. You'll be able to review this material, share it with your colleagues. We invite you to follow us on social media, on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And we'll send out an email to those who are registered for the webinar with follow-up material regarding this presentation. I want to thank Sami Lindgren for the kind introduction today, and yesterday for cooperation in preparing it.
Thank you.
And to our marketing team, of course, for all your support. Thank you, Mintu. Thanks for your attention, and keep in touch. Remember to reach out to WebSecure, either sales or support. Contact information is on the screen. If you have any questions before the following webinar, we're happy to discuss these matters further. Cheers and good night.